All right, good morning. It is Friday, 17th, I think. Yeah, 10/16, October 16, 2020, RT 210 B. We are in cardiac A&P, continuing on with the lecture from yesterday. All right, let me share my screen, back to the lesson plan. All right, now I want to catch up on this lesson plan here. You'll find this in your note-taking guide. If not, you can copy it down. But it is talking about the pulse. We went, did some few things. We went over the PowerPoint, showed you the PowerPoint up until a certain point. And then I want to go back. I told you I'd be going back and forth with the PowerPoint and the lesson plan to give you the best notes you can get. Make sure you guys are reading the material. Very important that you're reading the material. All right, so the pulse. The pulse reflects the contraction of the left ventricle, the systole. And we talked about depolarization, aka systole, aka squeeze, aka contraction. Those are all very, very important, and they mean the same thing. So when that left ventricle squeezes, that's what you're feeling in the systole, okay? And you feel the pulse. You can feel the pulse in different sites because what you feel in is the artery, all right? Remember we said the blood flow through the heart. Once it leaves the lungs, it comes back to the heart via the pulmonary veins, and it dumps into the left atria. Well, after it leaves the left atria, it goes through the bicuspid or the mitral valve into the left ventricle. And then that will pump it through the aortic valve into the aorta and then to the body. That left side is the systemic side. On that side, we expect blood to be fully rich with oxygen by the time it gets to that left side. The right side of the heart, we said, is the pulmonary circulation. Its responsibility is to get blood to the lungs, okay? Right side of the heart's responsibility is to get blood to the lungs, right? And so once it gets to the lungs, that's where it picks up the oxygen, and that magic happens that we talked about. When we get into pulmonary A&P and pulmonary mechanics, you're going to learn more about the alveoli and the type of cells that are make up the alveoli, right? And how the gas actually does exchange. And so that is what's very, very important. But that's going to come a little bit further when we get to the next lesson. Turn your mic down, your volume down or something, because I can hear reverb to my speaker. Testing? Good, okay. All right, and so that's going to be where the magic happens. It gets very, very exciting and interesting when we get to that point, okay? But for basics, the left side of the heart pushes the blood to the body, right? That's the left side of the heart. Can you see me on the screen? Okay, the left side of the heart pushes the blood to the body, right? That's what we want. So when we feel that, it should be full of oxygen. It should be about 100 millimeters of mercury pressure of oxygen. That is the arterial oxygen pressure or tension, the P little a O2. We talked about the P means pressure, and little a was arterial, and big A means alveolar. So you got to go back and look at your abbreviations. You can't forget those. Practice them for the test and then forget them, because we're going to start talking about the partial pressure of oxygen in the artery, the partial pressure of oxygen in the vein, the partial pressure of oxygen in the alveoli, the partial pressure of CO2 in the artery, the partial pressure of CO2 in the vein, right? Those are major points of your career. Learning respiratory therapy, you have to know that those volumes exert pressure, okay? Volume is synonymous with pressure. The more volume there is, the more pressure there'll be. The less volume, the less pressure, okay? Now, when it comes to gas, gas also exerts a pressure. We said that oxygen is 21% of the atmosphere. I said that to you. You'll learn it a little bit more when we get to gas physics. But not only is it 21% pressure of the percentage in the atmosphere, but it also exerts a pressure, okay? And you're gonna learn that how to convert that percentage into a pressure to understand the world around you, all right? Oxygen is 21% of the atmosphere. Nitrogen is 78% of the atmospheric gases. What you're breathing right now where you are is 78% nitrogen. It's only 21% oxygen. And then 0.03% CO2. And then 0.01% trace gases like methane. I call it the farts of the world, okay? Because that's methane coming out your body. And so, and then there's argon. I think it might be 7% argon, something like that. You'll learn it when we get to it. But those gases also exert a pressure, okay? And you're gonna learn how to convert those percentages into pressures to understand it. Now, so when we come back to pulse, pulse is what you can feel. It's a tactile sensation. Tactile means touch, okay? You can palpate. Palpate also means touch, all right? Those are words that you need to understand. Tactile and pulse and palpate, okay? Palpate means to feel. So if I say palpate the patient's radial pulse, or palpate the patient's carotid pulse, their femoral pulse, palpate the temporal pulse, palpate the ulnar pulse, or palpate the brachial pulse, or the Dorsalis Pedis pulse, okay? All of those pulse sites are arteries. You can't feel your heartbeat in a vein. You can only feel your heartbeat through an artery, because we said the blood coming from the heart on the left side goes to the body in an artery. Arteries take blood away from the heart, right? So all of the arteries in your body, you feel them as you heartbeats. So for instance, your book is going to have good information about arteries, all right? Your book is going to show you the different arteries of the body. Let's see if we can find a couple on Mr. Johnson. All right, this will be his muscular. This is his organs, okay? We've got our heart here, our lungs. This is his left lung, his right lung, right? Right side of the heart, left side of the heart. These are the veins here. These are the veins. The smaller ones are the veins. What is this right here? Coming from the heart, going out. Well, the vena cava would be, yeah, this is the vena cava, superior vena cava, and then you can't see the inferior vena cava. But then you have pulmonary arteries that will go into the actual lung itself. And then you have some major veins. See, these blue ones are veins. And they're major veins that come back to the heart that feed into the superior and inferior vena cava. See, we didn't show you all those because it's not, part of. This is the superior and inferior vena cava, right? But you still have, see how it's branched off. This vena cava is branched off and then has a little piece back here, okay? That's all of this stuff, okay? Those are all the blood that's returning to the heart, coming and dumping into this vena cava and then into the right atrium, okay? Oh, yeah. Anytime your vessels get torn or punctured, you can bleed to death. So, volume and pressure. Like I said, volume and pressure is very important. So if you lose volume, you're going to, so just like Ms. Tabor said, if one of these veins or arteries here go the arteries. See that? This is the aorta here. And these are these that come off here. See these right here? That's these. Common carotids. These are your carotid arteries that you can feel when you palpate. Your pulse right here, that's a carotid artery. See how it's red? So the red is blood rich. It now has come from the left ventricle into the aorta and into the body. So some of it goes up toward the brain, and these will go down to the body, okay? And there's one in the middle that goes down to your femoral. So I'm gonna show you. These are your arteries, they're red, okay? Now, if one of these arteries become punctured, then what do you expect your blood pressure to be? If you get a cut or a shot and one of these arteries is nicked and you start to bleed, how do you expect the blood pressure to read? High or low? Huh? Low, because pressure and volume are synonymous. So if my volume of blood is being leaked out into my body, that volume is not coming to my body anymore, right? It's not coming in the closed system. So when I take your blood pressure, it's going to be super low, right? Emergently low. And so we're going to have to stop the bleed, or you're going to bleed to death, because too low blood pressure is just as deadly as too high. All right. So these are my arteries here, and they come out to the body. Okay. This is one of the arteries here that comes down to the midsection of it. See how big that is? That's coming from the back of the heart down to the middle part of the body. See that? So this will come down. You have an abdominal artery, right? And then it even branches off to your femoral. This will be your femoral or your femoral arteries. And you can feel your pulse down here, right in the groin, okay? So those are very important. And they don't show the ones that are necessarily on the hands. We'll talk about the ones that you feel on the hands and the feet. Yeah, I don't have them on the hands. All right, Mr. Jones. All right. So speaking of that, these are the places we just talked about feeling your pulse. You palpate your pulse on an artery, and what you're feeling is the systole, or the contraction, or the squeeze, or depolarization, right? They're all the same thing of that ventricle pushing the blood to the body. So here are the sites. Radial off the thumb. You have an artery that comes down and it goes around your hand like that. On this side is the radial pulse. This side will be the ulnar pulse. This will be your ulnar pulse, okay? Radial on the thumb and ulnar on the other side. What happens is that blood-rich artery comes up your hand and loops in your hand and comes back down. All right, that's why you can get a bad cut or shot in your hand and die, because if you nick that artery, you're going to be bleeding to death unless they can hurry up and fix it. All right, so that's the radial. This will be my ulnar pulse. Okay, next will be my brachial pulse. The brachial is in the inner side of your fold of your arm, not over here toward the outside, but more proximal or toward the trunk, right? Remember we said proximal means toward the trunk. If this is the trunk and I'm talking about something on my arm, if I say proximal to the trunk, then it's on this side of my arm, right? Because this is close to the trunk. Distal to the trunk will be over here, away from, okay? So proximal is about right in here. So you can feel your own pulse right there. That's your brachial pulse. That is where we take the blood pressure over this arm, because we're reading the pressure in the brachial pulse, all right? What about the carotid pulse? The carotid artery, and these are arteries. This is radial artery, ulnar artery, brachial artery, right? Everywhere you have an artery, you can feel your pulse. Carotid pulse is felt over the carotid artery. You have your trachea, where you feel your neck right there in the middle, and slide over to the left just a little bit. You should feel your carotid pulse. That's your carotid pulse. Temporal will be in your temples. Your temple, you can feel your pulse in your temples. That's why a lot of assassins shoot people in the temple. You shoot the temple, you rather the brain and the artery, you bleed to death immediately. Okay? So then you also have, let's see, what's the other one? Femoral. Femoral will be here, right in the groin, right? Femoral. You feel it right in your groin there and push down. You should feel a long, strong thump. That's your femoral artery, which is large. Okay? That femoral artery is really large. And so we use the femoral artery if we get into a bad emergency and the patient is bleeding to death, blood pressure is really low. You try to feel a pulse on his radial, you can't feel it. You can't feel it on his brachial. You barely can feel it on his carotid. What they do is they instantly go down to your groin and feel it there. Because when the body is in shock, the body will shunt all of the blood to the midsection, okay? The body wants to live no matter if you do or not. So in the midst of an emergency, the body will try to preserve its own life by putting the blood where it matters. You can live without a leg, you can live without an arm, but you can't live without a heart. You can't live without your liver or your lungs, right, or your brain. So the body will say, well, forget the hands, let's just concentrate right here. And so all of the volume of your blood will be shunted toward the middle. And if the volume is higher in the middle, then the pressure will be higher in the middle because pressure and volume are synonymous, all right? And so then you have what's called the Dorsalis Pedis, and that is off across the top of your foot, all right? The top of your foot, there's an artery that goes across the top of your foot, and that's called Dorsalis Pedius, okay? You can feel that pulse as well. That's what the doctors feel when they come to you, see you every day. They check on you, hey, how you doing? Move your cover back, touch your legs and see if you got any edema, okay? And also feel for pulses down in your feet, because if you don't have pulses in your feet anymore, that means your circulation has been compromised. You should be able to feel thump, thump, thump all the way down in your foot. From your heart to your foot, you should feel it. If you don't, then there's a problem somewhere. There's some artery blockage or some type of circulation problem if you can't feel it in your foot. So they do that, check your pulses every day. Make sure your pulses are strong in your feet on both sides. All right, so those are the places to palpate, AKA feel, AKA tactile or touch a pulse, okay? Now, blood pressure, of course, we're gonna be doing this is one of your labs that we'll be doing, is taking each other's blood pressure, all right? So basically, the blood pressure is a sphygmomanometer. A sphygmomanometer, right? In a column, it's a column of mercury in a glass tube. Wow, that's really old, right? To measure blood pressure sounds as reflected through a stethoscope. The manometer is attached to a hollow rubber tubing to the cuff. And of course, then you use your stethoscope. I don't have my stethoscope in here, but then you use your stethoscope to listen for the sounds, all right? This is the sphygmomanometer. It used to be a glass column with mercury in it back in the day, but now it's an actual manometer, okay? It's got the pressures on there. Notice that the pressure says at the bottom, what's the unit of measurement? What's that unit of measurement down at the bottom?
Millimeters of mercury.
It is a mercury because we're testing pressure inside the body. The blood pressure is written as millimeters of mercury or torr, okay? Millimeters of mercury or torr. So that's that. It has a hollow rubber tube connected to the actual cuff. And this is the blood pressure cuff that you will put around somebody's brachial artery, all right? Then you have your little, Oh, okay, yep. It'll tell you where to line up on your artery, right? If you're using the person's left arm or right arm, you want to put this arrow right over the artery. So line up the cuff where the arrow is right over that artery. Wherever you feel it, that's where that arrow should be to give you the best reading, right? Once you put it on them, you will squeeze it and it will continue to inflate. When you inflate it, you'll notice that the manometer goes up. See that? So the trick is, once you inflate the cuff to a certain amount, you then open the valve, but you don't open it like this. That's too fast, okay? When you open the valve, you're gonna squeeze it until you don't hear the brachial pulse anymore. So you'll have your stethoscope on with the stethoscope stuck under the cuff, listening to the brachial thump, 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 thump. And then you squeeze till you can't hear. It's gone. That's when you can stop, okay? And then you open it up, you open it, barely open it. It should move like that. And you're listening. And then all of a sudden, dum, 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 dum. Right? The first thump you hear when it's moving is the systole or the systolic blood pressure. That's the top number. And then the last sound you hear is the bottom number. Simple. Put it over them, squeeze it up till you don't hear it anymore. It's gone, okay? Then you start your descent. Open it up. It should move about like that. And you just keep letting it do it till you hear it. Then thump, 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 thump. What was that blood pressure? If you were listening, I want you to tell me what was the blood pressure. Let's do it one more time. You'll do it when you open it up, you will start going until you hear the first thump. When you hear the first thump, that's the top number. Keep that in your mind. And you're gonna keep hearing it. And when you hear the last thump, that was the bottom number, okay? So everybody look at this and tell me what you think the blood pressure is. So listen to me as you see it moving. Thump, 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 thump. 140 over 80.
140 over 80.
Good. That's how that works. 140 over 80. Let's do it one more time and we're going to move on. All right, here we go. Thump, 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 thump.
150 over 110.
150 over 110. 150 over 110. Now, since you're not on my arm, one other note. When you're seeing it going down, you start hearing it, it will also tick a little bit. Once it finally starts thumping, the manometer will start ticking a little bit, but you can't go by tick only. You go by what you hear. Because sometimes it'll tick and you don't even hear nothing. So that'll give you a false reading. Don't just say, I'm gonna watch it until it starts ticking and that's my top number. And when it stops ticking, that's my bottom number. It doesn't work like that. You have to go by what you hear. Auscultate. Auscultate means listen. Auscultate means listen. So that's what the stethoscope is for the auscultation. You have to be able to hear it. All right? That's how you do a blood pressure. Manual. Of course, they got the nice little machines now where you don't have to do all of that, but the best way to take a blood pressure, make sure you write that down. The absolute most accurate and best way, most sure way to get an accurate blood pressure would be manual, okay? The machines lie. All right, so I just showed you the procedure. All right, we talked about the pathway to stimulation already on yesterday in the PowerPoint. So we don't have to go over that again. We talked about the SA node, the AV node, the rate, and all of that. We talked about that. Good. We know those terminologies there: systole, diastole, tachycardia, and bradycardia. Okay. Now, let's look at it at a cellular level. The cellular level. All right. So I'm gonna stop my share and show you on the board What's going on at the cellular level? I can't hear you. Oh, it's a blur. Okay. I mean, from the light. Oh. Put you on the board. Let y'all see. Talk about what's happening at the cellular level. Now, we talked about the physical layer, which is the actual squeeze, right? The thump and the squeeze. That's what you're feeling. The thump and the squeeze. You're feeling it with your hands. That's good. Okay. You feel it with your hands. That's the physical layer of the heart rate or the heartbeat, right? On paper, we know what's happening on paper. We got the right side, which is the pulmonary circulation. We have the left side, which is the systemic circulation, right? The oxygen level on the right side, it was a PVO2, right? Pressure of venous oxygen is about 40 millimeters of mercury. Really, really low. That's deoxygenated, right? On the left side, the P_A02, which is the pressure of arterial oxygen, is 100 millimeters of mercury. That's the normal. It should be about 100 millimeters of mercury, which the normal range is from 80 to 100, but 100 is the best, okay? 100 millimeters of mercury. So we talked about the heart does its thing. It squeezes, squeezes, squeezes. So that's the physical level. Then we have to talk about the electrical level, which is those SA node, AV node, all of that. And what happens is the P wave. The P wave is for atrial depolarization. Okay? The P wave represents atrial depolarization. That's when the atria squeezes, because it squeezes and then the ventricle squeezes. That's that love dub, love dub, love dub, right? So the atrial squeeze and then the ventricle squeezes. So when we're looking at the electrical aspect of it, on the electrical EKG or ECG, the P wave represents the atrial depolarization, and then the QRS is the ventricle depolarization. Okay, and then the T wave is when the ventricle repolarizes or relaxes. Now, you wonder what about the atrial repolarization? It is in there, but it's buried under the QRS, so you cannot see it. Because it does repolarize, but you can't see it, okay? All right, so P wave is when the atria depolarize or squeeze, right? And the QRS is when the ventricle depolarization or squeezes, right? Or systole. And then the ventricle repolarization is the T wave. This is a normal sinus rhythm. Beautiful. PQRST, PQRST, PQRST. That's how it should happen, right? That's how it should happen, no matter what. This is a normal rhythm. Now, when you don't have those electrolytes, then this becomes unnormal or arrhythmia. You have an arrhythmia, means not in rhythm, right? You may have a QRS that pops right here. You might have a couple of P waves that kind of fibrillate. You might have nothing but QRSs, which is a deadly rhythm, or you might have a flat line, which means asystole, okay? Now, on the cellular level, which where the notes are now, is this part. This is what's happening on the cellular level. In your cells of your heart, the heart muscle, it is full of potassium, K, right? The cell is full intracellular. Intracellular means inside the cell. Intracellular has high levels of potassium, which is a positive charge. And then on the outside of the cell, you have sodium. But what happens is sodium creeps into the cell. And when sodium creeps into the cell, it causes a reaction, and that's called depolarization. When that sodium gets into that potassium-rich cell, the cell says, no, we don't want you in here. So it squeezes. And when it squeezes and pushes the sodium back out. And when the sodium is back out, then it is relaxed, okay? So when the sodium is outside and the potassium is inside, it's relaxed. But when the sodium comes in, it causes a reaction called depolarization. So this is depolarized versus repolarized. Sodium outside, potassium on the inside. When that sodium creeps in, it causes a reaction, causes that cell to squeeze or depolarize or systole, right? And when that happens, the sodium is then pushed back out of the cell through a sodium ion channel, okay? You have a channels on your cells. You have a pump for potassium, and you have a pump for sodium, and then you have a pump for both, okay? So it's not a negative, or not say negative, it's not a bad reaction. You got to have it, because if sodium don't come in, you have no depolarization. If you have no squeeze, you have no life. So you want sodium to come in and you want potassium to kick it back out. That's what happens during the systole and the depolarization, right? The depolarization versus repolarization. That's happened on the cellular level. The electrical level is the EKG. And the physical level is you looking at the heart move, right? Squeeze, squeeze. That 3 levels showing you how the heart works, okay? Don't forget that. You got a right side and a left side, and doing its physical thing, it gives me a blood pressure of 120/80, so I can say QRS over T, right? Because the T wave is repolarization, and the pressure at repolarization is 80 millimeters of mercury when the heart is relaxing. QRS is the QRS, or the depolarization, or the squeeze, and the pressure during ventricle depolarization is 120, because that's the systole, all right? So you have electrical level, the physical level, you have the cellular level, and the mathematical level, okay? The numbers, okay? All this is the same thing, guys. All the same thing, okay? All right, so let's keep on going. Don't forget, now your book and your lab book have great illustrations and pictures and information about these EKGs. There's a lot of EKGs out there, but you don't have to know them all. There's a few that we're going to focus on, but you need to know them. You can't learn them all in the lecture. You got to read and understand. All right. Moving right along. Put my mouse back there. All right, so what I just said, here it is. So you can go back and look at it. Intracellular elevated levels of potassium. Extracellular means outside the cell, have high levels of sodium. A negative electrical imbalance across the cell membrane with a positive charge on the outside, negative charge on the inside, causes depolarization, which is a change in intracellular charge from negative to positive due to the influx of sodium ions into the interior of the cell, which results in squeeze, all right? Then when a repolarization happens, it's because the electrical imbalance is restored by pumping the sodium back out of the cell, all right? So I just showed you a little bit easier way of understanding what they just told you, okay? That is, in a nutshell, what is happening on the cellular level. Now, you see why your electrolytes are so important? You got to get the right amount of sodium. You have to have the right amount of potassium. If you're not getting potassium in your diet, you're not eating foods that have electrolytes in them, like bananas and green leafy vegetables and stuff like that, if you're eating just chicken wings and fries and ramen noodles all the time, you're going to have heart problems. Not only are you going to have a lot of sodium, but you're going to have a lot of hypertension. You're going to have a lot of arrhythmias, chest pain. All that comes from not getting your right amount of nutrients. You got to change your diet now that you know how your heart is working, and it's working every day for you. So no matter what we do to them, we're drinking, smoking, whatever we're doing, you're damaging your heart. All right? All right. So I just told you about the EKG, which we're going to learn, well, not learn more, but we'll be doing this on lab day. When you come for lab, we're going to really be going over these EKGs, showing you some more EKGs, doing the labs. That's going to be a full day, guys, so make sure you're here. All right? It's going to be a full day. But the basic parts of the EKG that you can see are the P wave, which is atrial depolarization. That's when the atrial contracts, right? The QRS is when the ventricle squeezes, and the T wave when the ventricle relaxes. Make sure you know that like the back of your hand. Now, sinus rhythms. When I have a sinus rhythm, that means sinus means I have all the parts. Sinus means it has a P wave, it has a QRS, and a T. That just means it has all its parts. Don't mean it's normal. It just means it has all of its parts. Okay? Let me see if I got it. See what page the EKG stuff is in the lab book. I found it at the break. But I know it's in your Egan's book. It's got a list of the EKGs, right? It's going to have sinus tachycardia, sinus bradycardia, right? SVT. It's going to have arrhythmias, VTAC, right? All of those rhythms are in your reading. Make sure you're looking at your reading. It's imperative, okay? Now, you have some atrial rhythms. And let me make sure y'all understand this. Sinus means you have all the parts. You have a P, QRS, and T. Now, if you have that P, QRS, T, but the beat is less than 60, then it's sinus bradycardia, right? It's a heart rate less than 60 that has all of its parts. That means sinus bradycardia. If I have all my parts, but my heart rate is faster than 100, then that's sinus what?
Tachy.
Sinus tachycardia. All right. Now, if I have an arrhythmia, now arrhythmia will be like, what's arrhythmia? That means, for instance, this will be an arrhythmia. You have time in between these waves, right? So the P and the R wave, the P wave and R wave should be a certain amount of space, right? You're going to learn that in the book. It should be a certain amount of space between each one, okay? And it's going to be the same. If there are 3 small boxes between the P and the R here, then it should be 3 small boxes between the P and the R here on the EKG paper, okay? That red and white paper with the boxes. If there's 3 small boxes between the P and the R here, all right, so this is the PR interval, right? This will be the PR interval here, from here to here. This will be called the PR interval, the space between the P and the R, all right? Now, if that space is 3 small boxes on this one, then it better be 3 small boxes on this one for it to be a normal sinus rhythm. But if the P and R is 3 to 5 boxes here, let's just say it's 3 boxes here, and then this one to this one is only 2, then that's an arrhythmia. It's out of rhythm, right? You ever seen somebody dancing with no rhythm? That's out of rhythm. Like, hold on, that whatever he doing, whatever dance that's called, it can't be right. Okay, that's called out of rhythmia or arrhythmia. Okay, that's just one example of an arrhythmia. but they have to be the same. That PR interval should be the same all the way through the beats, okay? Or the R to R, right? From this R to that other R should be the same amount of space, every single one. If it's not, then it's an arrhythmia, okay? Now, you're not gonna have to measure all of these and all that because you're not in school for EKG tech, right? You're not trying to be a cardiologist. You're not trying to be an EKG tech. Your EKG techs, they know all about every bit of this heart rhythms, even though they can't interpret. Only the doctor can interpret, all right? You can't look at it and say, oh, you're suffering from such and such and such. You can't do that. You're not a cardiologist. Only from the doctor can say that, even though you might know, but you can't say that. You can't write that down in the chart because you will be sued, all right? So in the Egan's book, make sure you look at the EKG section. I'm trying to think, I don't know what chapter it's in. I'll find it during the break. I think it's, let me see. I want to get to that chapter, so everybody needs to have their book out so we can go to that chapter. Matter of fact, it is, what time is it? 45. Let's just stop right here and take a break. It's 8:48, so it says 8:50. Take a break to 9 o'clock. We're gonna stop the recording, come back at 9 o'clock with your book. Okay, you need to have your book out so we can go over some of these rhythms. 3:53. Okay, let me stop the recording and then take a break. We're gonna come back at 9 a.m. All right, guys, so we're gonna talk about some of these rhythms, basic interpretations of EKG waves. If you look at page or chapter 18 in your reading, that's part of your reading for this test, okay? So be sure you look at this chapter. We're gonna go over a few things, but like I said, I got a video in here for you to watch tonight, and there's also the book that we'll go over a few key things in, because we're also going to do more learning during the lab. All right, so that's why I say it's important you come for your lab, because during the lab, we will not only let you check off, but you're going to be teaching you. It's going to be more of a teaching and checking off, because there's several things to do. You're going to do EKGs, you want to do your blood pressure, measure each other's pulse and respiratory rate, stuff like that. Okay, so we're going to talk about, it's going to be more, so bring your lab book and also bring your notes so that you can take any kind of notes that you want to take. The lab, I might record it and might not record it because it's actual lab. All right. But I will in the future have labs like stuff like EKGs, but we're working on that with this new video thing we got going. But be here for the lab, guys. Just be here, have your lab book and your notes so you can take notes, all right? Because you're going to be learning as well as checking off on tomorrow, all right? All right, so some of the sinus or basic rhythms. So let's start off on page, 359. Let's look at 359, or 358. If you look at page 358, guys, it's going to tell you about some of these small boxes and how we count the heart rate. So this is what the page looks like. Right here where I have highlighted. Right here where it says 3 small boxes, 1 small box, stuff like that. For instance, it says identifying the rates. If I want to know what the heart rate is, if I don't, I got the beats, but it doesn't say a number. How do I know what the heart rate is? We said 60 to 100 is normal. 60 to 100 is normal. Less than 60 is bradycardia. Greater than 100 is tachycardia. Now, it could be sinus or not, because VTAC, which is ventricular tachycardia, is just a bunch of QRSs. There are no P waves, so that would not be sinus, right? Because sinus means it has all the what? Parts, okay? So assuming that we have all the parts, we count what the heart rate is by, look at right here, it says 2 large boxes, and we're talking about the R wave. Now, if I see this R wave here, look at this EKG here. Where is the R wave? The one at the top, right? The highest one, because that's QRS. QRS. The R is at the top. So I'm going to write that on my book so you guys should be able to see that, but I'm going to put it on the book anyway. These are my R waves. See those little points? That's the R waves. Now, notice in this EKG paper, you got a bunch of little bitty boxes and you have larger boxes. Okay? Bunch of little bitty boxes and you have larger boxes. Can y'all see that? You see that, Ms. Tabor? Okay. So you got little bitty boxes and you have larger boxes. When I am counting the heart rate, I am counting the boxes, the big boxes in between R waves. So look at these last two right here. This one and then the next one over here. How many large boxes are in between that? So if I count the large boxes, all right, if I count the large boxes, okay, so from here to here is what we're counting. So 1 large box, 2 large boxes, 3 large boxes, 4 large boxes. There are 4 large boxes in between these R waves. So theoretically, if there's, how many I say, 3 or 4? I got that fast. Look right here. Okay, from here, 1 large box, 2 large boxes, 3 large boxes, 4 large boxes. So 4 large boxes. So look on page 358. If we have 4 large boxes, what is the heart rate? 75. Does everybody see that? Everybody online see that?
Yes.
Okay. Huh? You still count it. You count them, and if they don't, now all the R boxes, I mean R waves, don't land right on a large box. So if it lands a little bit past one, then you have to count a little bit past the next one, and a little bit past the next one, right? Just wherever it lands is how you do it. Okay, it doesn't necessarily always going to land right smack dab on a large box. Okay, so if the R wave you're counting from is a little bit past the large box, then you count a little bit past the next one, right? It's just the same space. You just take it and then go to the, like that. That's why a lot of EKG techs use a compass, one of those with a point and a pencil on the end. I forgot what you call it, protractor or something. It's a compass, an EKG compass, and it's got a pinpoint, so they can pinpoint the space between the R waves. So they start at one R wave, and then do one small box, one large box, and then do that point to point to count. You don't have to do all of that. So we said that between these two R's, between this one and this one was 4 large boxes. And so then we looked at page 358, which is the page right before, and it says if you have 4 large boxes, what's the heart rate?
75.
75. So that heart rate is 75. So if it has all of its parts and the heart rate is 75, that is a normal sinus rhythm. Okay? Because normal is 60 to 100. All right? Normal sinus rhythm. Now, what if my boxes, let me see if I can find one. Let's look at this next one on page 360. Without looking at the answer, let's just look at the wave first. All right? This one here. This one up here. So let's count now how many large boxes are between these R's. Okay? Okay, Kayla. So let's look from this R to this R. Okay? So let's look at it. This one happens to fall right on it, but sometimes they don't. So let's count. 1 large box, 2 large boxes, almost 3 large boxes, but a little bit less than 3 large boxes, right? So we know it is 1, 2, almost 3. So let's just say if it's almost 3, then what would the rate be for 3 large boxes? So what you do is, essentially what they're doing is, if it's 2 large boxes, that will be 300, because each large box, guys, is 300 beats per minute, okay? 300 beats per minute. So if you have an R and another R right on the very next big box, that's 300 heart rate, okay? It's flying, okay? So each large box represents 300. So what they're doing is, they're saying 2 large box, if it's 2 large boxes in between the R waves, then you take 300 divided by 2, and that's the heart rate. Okay, so 2 large boxes will be a heart rate of 150, because 300 divided by 2 is 150. 4 large boxes, which we just did, right? 4 large boxes is 300 divided by 4, and 300 divided by 4 was 75. Okay, that's how we got 75 on that last EKG. Now, I said, what if it's 3 large boxes? Well, then you take 300 divided by 3, and what is that?
100.
100. 100. All right. So this one that we're showing is a little bit less than 3 boxes, right? It's not exactly 3 boxes, so it's a little bit more than 100. Okay. So you won't be able to say, well, I guess that's 99.5. You don't have to do all of that. We're not being that detailed, but we're showing you. If you look at the answer for 18-9, what does the answer say that this EKG is? 18-9. What did they say at the bottom? Sinus tachycardia. So it's a little bit more than 100, because it wasn't exactly 3 boxes, right? The less boxes, the higher the heart rate. If it was 3 exact boxes, it would be normal, because 160 to 100 is normal. But since that second R wave was a little bit less than that 3rd box, that means it's a little bit more than 100. Okay, let's look at the next one. Let's look at the next one. 18-10, which is this one. Okay, let me do it this way. If we're counting the boxes, you see. All right, so okay, let's start with one that has exactly on a box. So let's count it. So 1 large box, 2 large boxes, 3, 4, 5, 6, and a little bit more than 6, right? So let's just say if it's 6 large boxes, what would the heart rate be if it was 6 large boxes? That'd be 300 divided by 6.
50.
How much?
50.
50. Good, Ozzy. Good, Allison. Was that Allison or Alicia?
Alyssa.
Alyssa, I'm sorry. And Isaac. Good. Yes, 50. And this is showing that it's not exactly that. It's a little less than that. So what is 50? A heart rate of 50 is what's called? Sinus what? Bradycardia. Less than 60. So that's how you count the heart rate, guys. Just count the R's. You count the space of the large boxes in between the R's. All right. Remember, they don't always fall right on the line. Sometimes it's a little bit before, a little bit after, and you can just kind of guess about where it is. Okay. But that's how you would count if you don't know how long this strip is. Okay. Listen to what I'm saying. These strips, and most strips, EKG strips that you get at the hospital, they assume that they are 6-second strips, okay? If you have, I'm gonna teach you a shortcut. Now this is a shortcut. Only if you know for sure it's a 6-second strip. And the question will say, look at this 6-second strip. What is the heart rate? If they say something like that, and they say for sure that this is a 6-second strip, then you just count the R's and multiply by 10, okay? You can just count all the R's on that strip, multiply it by 10. So let's look at 18-10 again. How many R waves do you count?
4.
It's 4 of them, but then you can assume it's about to be one right in here too, right? So it's 4 of them. So 4 times 10 is about what? 40. And since there's one that was probably getting ready to fall right here, you know it's almost, it might be even 50, okay? So you can count like that. What about 18-19? Look at 18-19. Count the R's on that one. 18-9, I'm sorry. At this one here. How many R waves do you see? 11, right? So that heart rate is what? 110, sinus tachycardia. Okay, and they already told you that it was sinus tachycardia. You counted it by the box and said it's a little more than 100, right? And so you counted 11, so it's 110. You counted it if you know it's a 6-second strip. So don't get caught up with that, guys, because if you count the R's and they don't say it's a 6-second strip, it's not going to work for you. It's not going to work. It only works if you know for sure it's a 6-second strip. Okay. All right. So that is how you count. That is how you count. Now look at figure 18-11. This is an arrhythmia. All right. Now let's read what it says about arrhythmia on page 360. 360 says sinus arrhythmia means it's got all its parts, but there's some spacing issues, right? Either the PR interval is not the same, the R to R is not the same, the ST segment is not the same. There's something going on that makes it out of rhythm, right? So sinus arrhythmia is a common arrhythmia and recognized by irregular spacing between QRS complexes. The spacing is measured by identifying the intervals between the R waves of successive QRS complexes, right? So what he's saying is between the QRS and QRS, between this and this one, it should be a space, the same amount of space from here to here, okay? It should be the same amount of space from here to here, all the way through for it to be in rhythm. But if this R wave and this R wave is not the same space as this R wave and this one, then that's out of rhythm, okay? It's out of rhythm. And you can do that by just counting the boxes in between each one. So if let's look at the first two R waves. The first two R waves in figure 18-11. See how much space is between those two R waves. The first two. So let's see, it's about, let me see. 1, 2. Okay, so a little less than 2. A little less than 2. Because they don't land right on the line, right? So since they don't land right on the line, guys, you have to count it like that. Okay, if I'm looking at these, this one's a little bit before this line, right? So when I'm counting one large box, I have to stop right here. From here to here would be one large box, right? Because I got the same space before this line, I have to stop the same space before this line, right? So this is, let's see, one large box, two large boxes, right? It's less than 3. So it doesn't go all the way here. So it's a little less than 3, okay, between these two. Now, if you want to get real technical, you can count the little bitty boxes if you had to. You could count the little bitty boxes if you wanted to, but I'm not going to do all of that, okay? But so that's about a little less than 3 on this one. So let's look at this one to this one. All right, so boom, 1, 2, 3. This is exactly 3 here, right? This is exactly 3, but this is a little less than 3. Let's look at this one to this one. All right, 1, 2. This one's about 3. 1, 2. This one's about 3. Let's see. 1, 2. This one's not. This one's right on the line. So it has to be precise. And the EKG machine will read that for you. It'll say arrhythmia. You don't have to be, because we're not giving y'all compasses to count and all of that. You don't have to do all of that in this course. You're not trying to be an EKG tech, okay? But that's just showing you, they're just telling you how arrhythmias are formed, okay? When there's a sinus arrhythmia, it means it has all its part, but there's a spacing issue. It's either not the same space between R to R's, or it might be the PR interval might not be the same, right? And that's what makes it out of rhythm, okay? So you have sinus arrhythmia, you have normal sinus rhythm, sinus tachycardia, sinus bradycardia, right? We talked about sinus arrhythmia, what that means, okay? You're not gonna worry about the blocks. I'm not teaching y'all heart blocks and all of that. You can look at it, but that's a little further. That's in ACLS, that's a little farther. All right, let me see what else we need to go over. Let's look at 18-15. This is atrial flutter. Atrial flutter. Look how 18-15 looks. It looks like a knife, a sawtooth pattern. That is an atrial rhythm. That's not, it looks beautiful. This one here. Looks like a sawtooth, right? Like the edge of your blade at a kitchen knife, okay? That is a telltale sign of atrial flutter. All right, that's atrial flutter. That's an atrial rhythm, not deadly. It's not, all the atrial problems are not life-threatening. The life-threatening ones will be the ventricular problems, right? Because they're the ones that blow or send the blood to the body. And if they're not pumping, you're not circulating, you're dead, okay? So that's atrial flutter, 18-15. Make sure you look at that. You can do a little reading about that, see what causes it, all right? Then you have atrial fibrillation. Now, atrial flutter is the sawtooth cut. Perfect, looks beautiful, right? But a fibrillation, the P waves are just twitching. See, the P wave, look at it, just quivering. See how that's quivering? You got the QRSs, but the P waves are just quivering. And look at this one. Look how far away these two R's are compared to these R's. See that? That's an arrhythmia, right? That's an arrhythmia. All right, this is an arrhythmia. This arrhythmia is called atrial flutter, right? That's one of the arrhythmias, atrial flutter. I'm sorry, this one is, the sawtooth is atrial flutter. That's an arrhythmia called atrial flutter because the P waves are not supposed to be doing that, okay? Another arrhythmia would be atrial fibrillation. So everybody say fibrillation. When you think of fibrillation, just think of it's cold outside. It's fibrillation, right? It's just twitching. The atria are just doing this. They're not contracting. They're just doing this. The ventricle is contracting, but the atria are just twitching, okay? And you can see it's just a little quiver. They look different. They're not, all the P waves are not the same. They're just quivering, all right? That's atrial fibrillation, also not a deadly rhythm, all right? Then we have what's called premature ventricular complex. When the QRS come out of nowhere, right? Like somebody, you ain't go in the kitchen and somebody just, what you doing here, right? You weren't supposed to come till 5 o'clock. It's 3 o'clock. What you doing here? You came too soon, right? That's what we say about PVCs, which is 18-17 in your book. PVCs, this one. Look at this guy, out of nowhere. QRSs should always follow what wave? What should the QRS come after what wave? If you look, the P wave. You have a P wave, QRST, P, QRST, P, QRST. Well, he's coming out of nowhere. It may be a P, QRST, and then another QRS. Where's the P wave? It didn't come yet, right? So that's what you have to be, that's premature ventricular complex, a PVC. It's got an R, it's just upside down. Yeah, it's a bizarre, PVCs will be a bizarre looking QRS. A lot of times it's upside down, it's wide, it just looks funky, right? Looks bad. But main thing is that it does not follow a what? A P wave. If you have a QRS that comes out of nowhere, does not follow a P wave, it is a PVC. Okay? And they look like that. They look crazy, they look bizarre. It's not hard to spot a PVC. PVCs are not life-threatening unless they become more. Like unless they are continuously falling closer and closer to that R wave, or they keep on like 3 or 4 or 5 back to back to back, then they can become dangerous, right? When they're multifocal and they become more and more at a time, then they can be life-threatening, okay? PVCs can be life-threatening if it's a lot of them, right? But not just by itself out of the blue. Everybody throws a PVC here and there, okay? And that can come from your electrolyte imbalance, okay? Now we get to the 2 most definitely deadly rhythms. 2 most definitely deadly rhythms would be VTAC and VFib. Make sure you look at this recording. VTAC and VFib are 2 ventricular arrhythmias that are deadly. VTAC means nothing but QRS, 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 QRS. Look at 1818. This is VTAC. You don't see any T wave. I mean, you don't see any P waves at all, right? No P waves. And then look at the rate. Count the R waves on here and tell me what the heart rate is. If this is a 6-second strip, assuming that this is a 6-second strip, I want everybody to put it in the chat without telling me. Don't say it out loud. Write it to me in the chat privately. Tell me what you think the heart rate is in this one. And if you count this one, that's fine. If you don't count it, that's fine. But the one that you definitely see, what is the heart rate? Now you can use the big box method, or you can just count the R's, assuming that it's a 6-second strip. VTAC. I think that might be a little much. What did you put, Isaac? Hold on, let me see. Assuming that this is a 6-second strip. So y'all see it? Because I'm about to get getting heavy in my hand. And it's figure 18-18. Good. Yeah. All right, so I got some people in the chat. Let me check it out. Good. There you go. Yeah, either you was trying to kill him, wasn't you? Yeah, 150. 150. About 150 or 140, either one. You can tell me. That's fine. No, that's fine. That's fine. Okay, good. So 150. So that's pretty high. VTAC can be up to 300. It can be one big box in between the two. So if I look at the boxes between the R's, one large box, two large box, almost two large boxes, right? About two large boxes. One large box, two large boxes. And we said two large boxes is 300 divided by 2, which is what? 150. See that? You got it. You notice there are no P waves. So that's just, the ventricle is just contracting, just doing this. No P wave at all. Just, that'll kill you. We have to shock you for that, okay? Now, the most deadly rhythm, because remember, PVCs is a deadly rhythm, but it can be with a pulse or without a pulse. They can still have a pulse with a VTAC, okay? You'll learn that when you get a little farther into it. But for right now, you know that VTAC is a deadly rhythm, but the most deadly rhythms are V-fib and asystole, okay? V-fib is when you have VTAC, you have contraction, right? Depolarization, right? But with V-fib, there is no contraction. It's just the ventricle is now fibrillating, right? It's cold. It's just the ventricles is just doing this. If they're doing this, there is no circulation of blood, right? And we have to shock that, to shock it back into a normal rhythm, right? That's why we shock or defibrillate. So when you V-fib, you defib, okay? When you're in the hospital setting, you see you see V-fib, then you know you need to defib. That means defibrillate or shock, okay? You have to, and start CPR. When they are in V-fib, you call a code, start getting on the chest, shocking him, all right? This is code blue right here, V-fib. When they're in VTAC, if they could have a pulse still. So you want to start doing the chest then, but you're going to shock them or try to give them some medicine. We got medicine we can give them if they still have a pulse. So if they looking around like, what's wrong? What's wrong? You in you in VTAC, man. You know what I'm saying? If that's the case, we can give them certain medicines in ACLS to bring that back down, right? Or we can cardiovert, which is a little light shock, right? Which we can do while you're up. We give you a little propofol for sedation, and then boom, just hit you a little light shock to the heart to see if it'll go back to a normal rhythm, okay? But usually, VTAC will go into V-fib, all right? And when they're in V-fib, you must be on the chest, pumping, giving meds, and shocking, All right. So this is V field. Notice there's no, you should not make a mistake between A field and V field, because A field is when the P waves are just quivering, but you still got a noticeable QRS, right? You got a noticeable QRS, but the P waves are just kind of twitching along, okay? But for V field, there is no noticeable QRS, right? It's just like little upside down V's or little V's, right? Just little V's. Some of them are big, some of them are small, right? But there's no organization at all. That is V field. That is deadly. If you don't fix that, they are dead. They have no pulse right here. Next stage will be flatline. With V field, they have no pulse, because you have, only way to have a pulse, we learn, is if the ventricle is depolarized, right? Squeezing. That's what you feel, pump, pump, pump. But if it's just, there is no pulse. You feel no pulse, get on the chest, right? Call the code, start CPR. V field. And then, of course, asystole is flatline, okay? So make sure you guys look over those rhythms in your book. Very important on the rhythms, all right? And what we talked about, you can go back and look at the video, study it good, look at your reading. You won't have a whole lot of questions about these different rhythms, all right, at this level. Mostly will be, I might put up a rhythm of 1 or 2 EKGs and say, what would you do? What is this? It won't be a heart block to the 3rd degree, nothing hard like that, because you're not learning to be an EKG tech. All right, but you need to know sinus tach, you need to know sinus bradycardia, you need to know V-tach, you need to know V-fib, you need to know A-fib and A-flutter. Remember, A-flutter is the sawtooth pattern, right? The PowerPoint is there. It even has a little bit of pictures about what's happening during A-fib and V-fib and stuff like that. So look at that as well, okay? All right, let's go on back. All right. So your atrial rhythm, it says abnormal P waves. You can have a premature atrial contraction called a PAC, right? It's a little early, but don't worry about those. The main thing you need to understand is A flutter and A fib, right? Atrial flutter looks like the sawtooth. A fib is just the atrial, the P wave is just twitching. You got a QRS, but then you have twitching, QRS, twitching, all right? That's A fibrillation. A flutter is QRS and saw. QRS, saw. It's pretty, but it ain't right. All right? It's pretty, but it's not right. Not life-threatening. All right, so your ventricular arrhythmias will be the PVC, premature ventricular contraction, like I said, large, bizarre, wide-looking QRS. Early in the cycle, it does not follow a P wave. The QRS should always follow a P wave. So if you have a QRS out of nowhere, he in your kitchen, he ain't supposed to be here, all where you come from, it's a PVC. It can be dangerous when it's multi-configuration, like if it's different sizes and that keep on happening, more than 1 in 10 beats, right? Or if it lands near the T wave, you don't have to worry about the landing near the T wave. It's hard for you to see that. But if you have more than 1 in 10 beats, so beat, PVC, beat PVC, beat PVC. Like you keep having them like that, then they can turn into V-tach. Okay, that might be a signal letting the cardiologist know or the doctor know, hey, he might be about to go into V-tach if we don't see what's causing these multi-PVCs. All right. Then you have V-tach. We showed you that. Nothing but QRSs, right? Right? Just QRSs. It says appear like continuous PVCs, in which PVCs are QRSs. A lot of times the V-tachs are wide. Some of them are small, so it's not always going to be wide. But if you don't have any P wave and you just have QRS, that's V-tach. Okay, that's V-tach. From 140 to 300. The one we saw was about 140 to 150 beats per minute in the book, but they can get to 300. If they are 300, then how many large boxes are in between them? If the heart rate is 300, how many large? No, 2 would be 150. one large box in between them. Remember, each large box is 300 beats per minute. So if you have an R wave in two large boxes, then that's 300 divided by 2, because you got 2 large boxes. If you have 3 large boxes in between the R waves, then that's 300 divided by 3, right? But if they telling you that the heart rate is 300, then that must mean that the R waves are landing on each large box. There's just one large box in between them, right? Because each large box is 300, right? So it can be up to 300, or it could be about 140, all right? If untreated, it will lead to V-fib. See, that V-tach will go into V-fib, and if you don't treat the V-fib, it's going to go into asystole, which is flatline, okay? Now, don't worry about V-flutter, because that's too hard to distinguish V-flutter. We're not even going to talk about V-flutter, okay? Don't worry about V-flutter. You can't even see that. But V-fib is life-ending. If you don't treat this right here, look, if you don't treat this V-tach, then it's going to turn into V-fib. If you don't treat the ventricular tachycardia, it's going to turn into ventricular fibrillation, which definitely is life-ending. All right? It's the same as cardiac standstill or asystole. Please remember this part because it will be on your test. Ventricular fibrillation is the same thing as cardiac standstill, which is asystole, just a flat line. Because what they're saying is physiologically it's the same. Even though the ventricles are just fibrillating, they're just quivering, right? They are quivering, but they're not contracting. And if they're not contracting, you don't have a heartbeat. So the fib is the same thing as asystole. You might as well be asystole because you don't have any contraction. All right? So when they say which one of these beats or which one of these rhythms is physiologically the same as cardiac standstill or the same as asystole, then you're going to say, oh, that's V-fib. Because it'll go from PVC, oh, he having some PVCs. Then if you don't treat it, then all of a sudden now he's in V-tach. And we don't treat that, he'll go into V-fib. And we don't treat that, he'll go into flatline, right? It's a rapid decline, right? So when you see V-tach or V-fib, you need to call the code. The code team needs to be there, all right? Now again, don't forget, some people with V-tach have a pulse, but very rare. All right, so if they have a pulse, you don't get on the chest if they got a pulse. You would just do medicines. But for our case, the 4 deadly rhythms are V-tach, V-fib, asystole, and PEA. Okay, so let's talk about, well, what is that? All right, so V-fib says you got to shock them. You must shock them. All right. Then asystole. Flatline. There's no electrical activity at all. That is cardiac standstill. And they're saying that if you're in V-fib, it's the same thing as cardiac standstill because he's just twitching, right? He's not compressing at all. All right. And then finally, EMD is the same thing as PE. It used to be known as PEA. And EMD is electrical mechanical dissonance, right? Which means you have a beautiful wave. You have this right here. I'm gonna show you, I'll go back to it in a minute. PEA, you have this right here. Look at that. Beautiful, right? Looks normal, got all the parts, it's perfectly spaced. But guess what? There's no pulse. The patient is laying there dead, but you looking at that and say, well, he got a heart rate, look good to me. And you walk off, he in there dead. And the monitor does not know that. The monitor don't know if he got a pulse or not. All it knows is it's a beautiful wave line. So a normal sinus rhythm without a pulse is called PEA, pulseless electrical activity. That's a phenomenon that can happen, all right? Also known as EMD, electrical mechanical dissonance. It means you have the electrical tracing, but you don't have the physical contraction. Nothing's happening. For some reason, the SA node and the AV node, the bundle of His and the Purkinje fibers are all firing, but it's not causing a contraction, okay? If they don't cause the contraction, you're dead, all right? So that's a weird phenomena that you have to touch your patient. That's why you always check your patient. Don't just read. You don't treat numbers. You don't treat waveforms. You treat the patient, because the waveform could say anything. That waveform could be up there, normal sinus rhythm, just as pretty as ever been, right? But he in there dead. You won't know. You thought he was asleep, right? Other alarms might be going off, like the respiratory rate, you know, right? It might be bing, bing, bing. He's not breathing. Then you be like, well, yeah, his, you know, maybe the lead is off place. I'll fix him in a minute. But the only thing, why they do what? Yeah, a lot of times they'll check you, make sure you're all right, make sure everything's all right. But yeah, so other alarms will be going off to alert you to something's wrong, right? The heart rate part will be fine, but saturation, his oxygen saturation is going to be dropping because there's no blood going, right? There's no gas exchange, there's no perfusion. So his sat going to be dropping. His respiratory rate will be at 0. So you'll be like, well, something got to be wrong. Hey, Mr. Johnson, what's wrong? Call the code, because he's dead, all right? But just because he's dead don't mean he don't have a heart rhythm, okay? It's called pulseless electrical activity. It can happen. Very rare, but it does happen. So a lot of times when we're doing compressions, they stop every 2 minutes to check a pulse. So we'll do compressions, give meds, and we stop, check the rhythm. If the rhythm looks beautiful, we'll say, do I have a pulse with that? No pulse. Keep on CPR, okay? Or I keep on doing it, and then we stop every 2 minutes to check the pulse and check the rhythm. The rhythm looks good. Does he have a pulse with that? Yes, I have a pulse. Several people will be touching femoral and carotid. Yes, I have a pulse. All right, let's give him some meds. Let's get him to the ICU. Okay, that's how you fix a cold. All right, but you have to check your patient, because he could very well have a rhythm but no pulse. Okay, that's called PEA or EMD. Those are the 4 deadly arrhythmias. You have VTAC. So I'm gonna do it like this. The 4 deadly arrhythms I'm gonna put in red. VTAC, VFib, yeah. Asystole, and EMD. These are the 4 deadly arrhythmias. If you have one of these, it can be deadly. All right, it is deadly. All right, we're gonna now take another break, and I have to make a run. So this break will be from, let's see, come back at, is that 9? Yeah. Come back at 10:15. It's about a 35-minute break. I'm gonna stop recording. I have to take my son something. So instead of 20-minute break, I'm gonna give you a 30-minute break, okay? It's only a little bit left. All we have left, guys, is the actual diseases. We have some cardiovascular diseases. See this page and this page, and that's it, okay? We just got 2 pages left. All right, coming back at 10:15. Now, you don't have to come back if you don't want to. I'm gonna come back at 10:15 and finish the lecture. But if you want to just watch the rest of it later, you can. You don't have to be present for the whole lecture if you don't want to. But I will be back at 10:15 to complete this lecture. And after class, I will put the homework assignment in for tonight. All right, I'll put the homework assignment in for tonight, which is, it's gonna probably be something super simple. It might be like a little worksheet that I'll put in there that you can work on, take a picture of, and send it back to me. It's one of these little quizzes. Okay, it's not for a grade, it's just for completion, but it's for help you study. All right, it's not one of the homework sheets. I'm not worried about no more of the homework sheets, but I'm going to give you one of these quizzes here. Looks like this, like the 2 valves, the 2 AV valves are what and what divides the heart into the left and right sides, cardiac muscle is referred to as what, inflammation means what, stuff like that. This is quiz number 1 for cardiovascular A&P. This will be the one that I show you or assign for tonight, okay? All right, so let me take a break here, come back at 10:15. Huh? No, I said 10:15. Yeah. 10:15, and I will finish out the lecture, which is just a page and a half, about almost 2 pages left, not even that much. It'll be about 15 more minutes. After that, we'll be done. Okay? All right. All right, we are back. It's back from break. Not only do we need to know the anatomy and the physiology of the heart and how it responds or coordinates with the lungs, because we are cardiopulmonary therapists. We know now the blood flow through the heart. We know the electrical conduction of the heart. We've talked about the layers of the heart and how we implement some of the words and terminology from the last lesson into our heart. We know that things like endocarditis and pericarditis are diseases or inflammation of certain parts of the heart. We learned about the blood, how important it is, and all of the jobs and responsibilities it has for our well-being, right? And so now we got to get into a few things that we may see in our patients. Different cardiovascular diseases, which can be hereditary or they can be brought about by our diets, not only our diets, but our lifestyle, right? Smoking cigarettes is one of the most worst things you could possibly do to your heart and your lungs. A lot of foods that are high in fat, high in saturated fats, are also considerably detrimental to the health of your heart. And now that we know how much work the heart has to do and all of the intricate pathways and exchanges that are happening with your heart, we have to understand some specific diseases that we may encounter in our patients. Hypertension, which is high blood pressure in the cardiovascular system. Remember, we said the system is a closed system. When the blood leaves this aorta and goes to the body, it's a closed system. No matter how long and how many miles of arteries we have, it's all one system. Goes in and out, come back and back, out and back, out and back. All these things are happening with every beat of your heart. And so volume, we said, was a synonymous with pressure, and other reasons can cause pressure, right? If the arteries are hard or won't give at all, that can contribute to pressure. If they're clogged with a bunch of grease and cholesterol, right? You know, we like to eat a lot of soul food, and if you're eating all of the chitlins and all of the hog maws and greens with the fat back in it and all your life, that's good eating, but over time it can start to grow or produce cholesterol. And you don't have to be overweight to have high blood pressure. You don't have to be overweight to have cardiovascular issues. And so just like when you put your thumb over a water hose, the pressure inside of that hose increases tremendously, in the words of your president, tremendously, right? And so on the end, what does come out, it squirts out really far, right? Same thing happening in your arteries. If you block half the arteries with cholesterol, the pressure in the artery distal to the blockage squirts out, and proximal to the blockage becomes high in pressure, all right? And so these are some of the things. So hypertension is the driving pressure of the heart, the pressure that's pushing the blood through the body. It doesn't need to be super high because that can cause you to stroke out, right? It can cause an aneurysm, one of the vessels to burst. If one of those vessels burst or balloon out, that's an aneurysm, right? And if that aneurysm pops, now you have a hemorrhage. And if it does it in the brain, there's hardly any time you can fix that. If you have a massive aneurysm, stroke, or hemorrhage in the brain, you pretty much die, okay? Now, blood clot or ischemic stroke, you can live, right? If somebody sees something wrong with you, you can't talk, whatever, they call an ambulance, they do a stroke protocol on you. They already know that you're coming. They give you blood thinners, right, to thin the clot, right? And can do some other treatments that you'll learn as you go on. But for a hemorrhage or an aneurysm, if you're not at the hospital when it happens, it's a high chance you're going to be you're going to perish because of it, okay? So now, hypertension, the normal high blood pressure or the normal blood pressure is 120/80. Systolic is 120, like we said. QRS is 120, T wave is 80. So you can look at it as QRS/T. That is your blood pressure, 120/80, right? Then we can have what's called a myocardial infarction, which is a MI, also known as a heart attack. That is when the coronary arteries become blocked, okay? Tissue becomes ischemic. Ischemic means lack of blood flow, all right? If you're used to having blood flow to an area and then that artery becomes blocked, then that area that was getting that good blood now does not get it, and it starts to die immediately. That's how important the blood is. It becomes ischemic, which means lack of blood flow to its area. And after it becomes lack of blood flow, or after the ischemia, you start to see necrosis, which it starts to die. The blood is the life of the body. And as soon as that blood stops flowing to that area, it starts to die. So what happens with, like, say, diabetes? You may have seen somebody who has gotten their foot cut off or a toe cut off or something like that because of diabetes. Because during the diabetes, the perfusion to that area is lost. The blood no longer gets to the foot like it used to. And that's why we said earlier, we check our Dorsalis Pedius artery every day in the hospital. They'll touch your toe, your top of your foot, to make sure you have blood flow down there. Because once that's gone, that foot becomes ischemic, right? Doesn't have the blood flow anymore. And after it becomes ischemic, it starts to die, okay? It'll start turning dark color, smelling, infection, gangrene. They have to either cut it off or that infection will travel up your system and get to your heart and kill you, all right? That's why we cut it off, to keep the infection from coming back toward the heart, all right? So myocardial infarction comes because the coronary artery is blocked. Now, we'll talk about this right quick. The coronary artery and the coronary vein. The coronary artery and the coronary vein. This is how the heart gets its blood. Because we say, okay, the blood returns to the heart via the superior and inferior vena cava, goes through the right side system, to the lungs, back to the left side, into the body. But how does the heart get its blood, right? Does the heart just use the blood that's flowing through it? No. The heart gets its blood from its coronary artery. The red artery, the red one is the coronary artery, and the blue one is the coronary vein. So the coronary artery is what supplies the heart muscle with its blood, right? Because it's just like any other muscle in the body. It's got to get its blood as well. And so the heart gets its blood supply from the coronary artery. See, and it goes all through the heart, all around the heart. See that? Touching all of the heart, supplying the heart muscle with its good blood supply, its oxygen, its nutrients, its platelets, its white blood cells, its red blood cells, its neutrophils. All of those things that are in the blood come to the heart itself by the coronary artery. It's high in oxygen. That's why it's what? Red. Okay. Then after the heart uses up the oxygen, it returns to the heart. It returns to the superior vena cava through the coronary vein, just like your other veins bring bad blood back to the heart. Well, the coronary vein brings the used up blood back to the heart, okay, to go through the system and then come back, okay? So it goes, this coronary vein will dump into the superior or inferior vena cava and go through the system. And then once it hits the aorta is where the coronary artery is attached to. The coronary artery is, you can't really see it, but the coronary artery is attached to some point in the aorta, which will branch off to the coronary artery to supply the heart itself with the good blood, okay? So what happens when a heart attack is this coronary artery, say you got chitlin juice in this coronary artery, you've been eating them every day, fried chicken, french fries, chicken wings, everything that you've been eating, grease. Over time, you have built up cholesterol, right, into the artery, and they become blocked. If this coronary artery becomes blocked right here, well, then the blood flow to this muscle and the blood flow to this muscle stops. That's called ischemia. When the blood flow is cut off, that's called ischemia. Well, what happens to this muscle right here if this becomes ischemia, right? Ischemic. Well, if the blood stops, there's no more blood flow to this part of the heart, and this part of the heart will then become necrotic. It means death, necrotizing, right? Necro means death. It starts to die, and then it will hit you like that and say, hey, you killed me. And it will tighten up on you, right? Once it tightens up on you, a heart attack is happening, all right? That's what happens from a myocardial infarction. Myo is muscle. The heart muscle has become ischemic. It started to die, and it attacks you, lets you know for sure what you have done. It's not something that says, ooh, I had a heart attack, right? If you have a heart attack, 99% of the time, you will know it, okay? People who said they have heart attacks have said it felt like some grown man was just standing on their chest. Not necessarily a sharp pain, but just mega pressure, like somebody just stepping on your chest, okay? And we have to get in there, and what we do is, what the doctor would do is, if we can catch you, if you don't die, what we do is we say, okay, since you have a blockage right here, we put what's called a stent in, right? And it's, or a cabbage, right? It'll be your cabbage patients. We go in and we will cut the artery and where the blockage is, and then take a piece of some other artery, maybe from your body somewhere, a piece of vein or a piece of artery from your body somewhere, and graft it in. And now we will go, if it was ischemic from right here to this part here, we will bypass it. We'll let the blood come here to the new artery we put in and go over that old artery to that muscle and connect it to that muscle. And now we don't have to worry about the bad blocked one. We take the blocked one out. You now have a bypass, right? That's what you call a bypass surgery, right? Or if we have a stent would be if the artery itself becomes super narrow, right? Say if this was the artery and it became real narrow in certain area, right? Well, we can stick what's called a stent in to the artery and blow it up, right? And then there's a little mesh, a metal mesh, like a titanium or something like that. A little metal mesh spring will spring open and hold that artery open, and then the applicator will be being removed, and now you have an open artery. That's called a stent being placed, all right? And so we can do that by putting you in interventional radiology, pumping the body with dye and watching the blood go through the artery, the coronary artery, and we can see where the blockage is, because where the dye stops, the color stops, that means there's a blockage there. And we can go in, they go in under the radiology, watching themselves do it. And then you try it again. Now we see we have blood flow to the area again, and you have restored blood flow to that part of the heart. Now, that part of the heart will never be the same. If you have a heart attack from ischemia and that part of the heart dies, you have to put some more or bypass or stent or whatever you do, it's not going to be the same, all right? There's going to be some weakness there, all right? Not only will be some weakness there, but see how it says muscle is weakened, right? After that weakness, you can see it on the EKG that a person had a heart attack before, okay? And the way I know if you had a heart attack before will be an elevated ST segment, all right? So instead of the ST, right? So from here to here, this is the ST segment, the space from the S to the T. There's a normal range for that as well, okay? You might not see that. Normal ST segment, right? The space between the S and the T. That's the ST segment, all right? There's, I don't know exactly what the normal is, but there's a normal. It should be the same all the way across, okay? It should be the same all the way across. What happened? Hold on. Okay, yeah, it should be the same all the way across. Now, what if you had a heart attack? If a patient has had a heart attack before, then their ST segment would be like this. See that? That's called an elevated ST segment. Now the S and the T segment is farther than it should be. Look at that. Now we have this. That's elevated. Elevated ST. that is a sure sign of a present or past MI. If your patient has had a present, is having an MI right now, or if they had one in the past. Once it happens, it stays like that forever, okay? So they really can't tell. When you having chest pain, we get an EKG. If it shows elevated ST segment, then we say, okay, we don't know if he's having a heart attack right now or if he had one in the past, but he's definitely had one before, okay? That's how they know you've had one for sure before. And so to be definitive, we would then get a troponin level, okay? Troponin is a hormone that the heart releases in the event of an attack. When it has an attack or has some ischemia, MI, it will release troponin into the system. And so the doctors will order a troponin level, and I think if it's 0.1 or 0.2 or something like that, I don't know the levels, you don't have to know those, but just know they can tell, yes, you're having one right now, okay? So if the troponin level is high and we have ST segment elevation, you are having an MI right now. If the troponin level is normal and you have elevated ST segment, then you have had an MI in the past. And they can't really tell for sure how long ago. It'll say undetermined age, right? MI of undetermined age, okay? So that's how we notice an MI. Let's see here. Then we get into right side heart failure, which is called cor pulmonale. Cor pulmonale is right-sided heart failure, usually due to pulmonary disease. Remember we said the right side of the heart is the pulmonary circulation. So if I have lung disease like COPD, right, or any other lung disease, interstitial lung disease, all of the other lung diseases that you want to learn about, emphysema, one of those types of diseases can cause my body or my heart to go into right-sided heart failure. You have right-sided hypertrophy. Remember we said hypertrophy is overworked muscle. It's overdeveloped because you're working it. The right side is having to work so much. Because look at this, if the right side of the heart has to push blood to the pulmonary artery, right? The right ventricle sends blood through the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary artery. Well, if the lungs are a problem, then the pressure inside the pulmonary artery is going to be higher than normal. And so if the pressure inside of the pulmonary artery is higher than normal, it's going to take more pressure from the right ventricle to get the blood through there, all right? And so it's going to have to work harder because of them lungs. And so if that's the case, it's going to start overdeveloping, okay? Overdeveloping because the right side shouldn't have to work hard. It doesn't have to push blood far. It only pushes it to the lungs. So it starts to overdevelop. That's called right-sided hypertrophy because the pulmonary artery is blocked, right? So it's kind of like if you used to blowing through a water hose, right? Your job was to blow through a water hose. Well, you fine, right? You have an easy job. But if I tell you that, okay, now I need you to blow the same amount of air through a coffee straw, all right? Now you're going to have to work harder, right? You're not going to be able to just blow like you were blowing like if it was through a regular straw or a water hose. But now that I'm telling you, I need the same amount of blood volume, but I'm going to put you in a coffee straw. Now you have to blow super hard to get that same amount of volume of gas or volume of blood, right, through that pulmonary artery. And that's going to be hard. It's going to work you harder. So the right side starts to overwork, and that's called cor pulmonale or right side heart failure because of the lungs. One way to know if somebody has cor pulmonale is called venous distension, also known as JVD, jugular vein distension. That's the vein over here that comes out that you can see in people. You don't see their carotid artery. That vein you see on men's, mostly men's necks, but if everybody has it, but that vein that you see on the neck, that's a jugular vein. That's the blood coming from the brain to the heart, okay? You can't see somebody's artery. That's a little bit deeper. Arteries are deeper than veins because the arteries are what supply the body with the blood. So the body's protecting its arteries better than it protects its veins. If you cut a vein, okay, that's blood going back to the heart. That's, you know, that's deoxygenated blood, waste blood. You know, it rather lose that type of blood than arterial blood. So not only is it buried deeper in the body, but it's more painful. Okay, if you stick a vein and they stick you for your vein, you don't feel it. You don't even feel it going in the vein. You feel it going in the skin, but you don't feel it going into the vein. But when you stick an artery, you feel it go through the skin, and when it goes through the artery, it's a very, very painful stick. An arterial stick hurts bad, okay? ABG, and guess who does them? Respiratory, all right? So the vein that you see is the jugular vein out there. And so when they lay back 30 degrees, if you lay your patient back about 30 degrees, it's about like this. All of a sudden that vein gets bigger and starts pulsating. That's a sure sign of right-sided heart failure, okay? Because the right side is trying to dump into, right? This vein is trying to dump into the right atrium, but the right side is all jacked up. So now it can't go through like it's supposed to because the pulmonary artery is tight and the right ventricle can't get the blood to the pulmonary artery. So if the right ventricle cannot pump the blood into the pulmonary artery, then it's going to back up, right? It's going to back up into the right ventricle, and then it's going to back up into the right atrium, and it's going to start backing up into your vein. And you can see it, okay? You can see it. It's like, damn, what's wrong? It's backed up, okay? It's backed up. Because the blood going to keep coming. You know, even though the heart can't handle it, it's going to keep coming. And if it keeps coming, it's just going to start backing up, okay? It's like traffic. All right. Congenital abnormalities are also the next type of diseases. So first you have your myocardial infarction, which is really a left-sided problem. It's a heart attack. You have a right-sided heart failure called cor pulmonale, and these are the kind of the telltale signs or what it is about. And then congenital abnormalities may cause a right to left shunt, and you might not be able to oxygenate by birth, right? Patients can be born, let's just say one of them, patients can be born with what's called transposition of the great vessels. The aorta and the pulmonary artery are considered the great vessels, okay? Some babies are born with the aorta. The aorta is where the pulmonary artery is supposed to be, and the pulmonary artery is where the aorta is supposed to be. So you can imagine the blood that returns to the heart goes to the aorta instead of to the lungs, right? And so it skips the lungs. And so if it skips the lungs, it cannot pick up oxygen. And that's why it says unable to oxygenate, because by birth, it's just some fluke rare disease that happens with our neonates. And the doctor will have to go in and switch them. So they'll take the aorta and put it where it's supposed to be and put the pulmonary artery where it's supposed to be, and the baby's fixed, okay? So that's causes a right to left shunt. Remember I said a shunt is when the blood leaves the right side of the heart and gets to the left side of the heart without ever picking up oxygen. That's a shunt. So either it went to the lungs and there was no oxygen there for it to pick up because the alveolar was closed, or it never reached the lungs at all because of one of these abnormalities by birth. That is a right to left shunt, okay? And you'll learn more about shunts as we get into those, all right? A vascular disease. Now, these are some diseases of the actual veins or arteries, okay? Aneurysm will be when that blood vessel balloons out, right? Like blowing a bubble gum balloon, right? That vessel should be straight and nice and uniform, but sometimes it's weak or thin and it will blow out like a balloon, okay? So it's weak vessel, and it can rupture. If it ruptures, that's a hemorrhage and you're going to die, okay? But it doesn't have to burst. It can just be ballooning out. It doesn't necessarily have to burst. But pressure, of course, means if you keep your pressure down, you won't have that issue naturally, but you could have it for other reasons, okay? Arteriosclerosis is hardening of the arteries by calcium. Sometimes either you took in too much calcium, or for some reason you have calcium deposits in the artery. And you know what calcium feels like, right? You ever seen calcium build up around a sink or a faucet? It's hard, okay? Or in a fish tank. It's hard, and those it's almost like concrete inside of your artery. Be careful, because if it starts to harden that artery like that, then you know it can't expand a little bit. It should be able to expand a little bit, and if it can't have any give, then the pressure inside is going to be high. All right, that's arterial artery sclerosis. All right, what about atherosclerosis? Now, some people don't like when I say it, but athero is when you have too much fat inside the artery, okay? So athero, fatso, okay? Remember people used to call you fatso? What they did with me when I was young, who cares? They trying to get where I'm at, you know what I'm saying? But anyway, athero is the same thing as fatso. So think of that. So atherosclerosis is fat deposits in the arteries, and arterial is calcium, okay? Another one disease is ischemia. Ischemia, we said, was decreased blood flow to an area, right? It can happen for a variety of reasons. Either you got a blood clot, a low blood pressure, or if you have some kind of blockage there. Anything that keeps the blood from getting to where it's supposed to go is called ischemia, okay? Ischemia. Now, hemorrhage is when that aneurysm that's ballooning out, if it bursts, now you have a hemorrhage, uncontrolled bleeding, usually a ruptured or torn vessel, okay? Hemorrhage means loss of blood, and it's uncontrollable. And if it's in the brain, it's hard to stop or find before the person dies. Then you have shock. The patient goes, if you ever heard of somebody going into shock. Shock is an acute peripheral circulatory failure. That means all the circulation just stops, the peripherals, right? The peripheral circulation stops, all right? And that can happen due to derangement of circulatory control or a loss of circulatory fluid. So if you start hemorrhaging, right, you're losing the blood, like, because we said the blood is in a closed system. So if you have an internal bleeding, it's bleeding inside the body cavity, and that don't mean it's circulating, okay? It's got to be in the vessel for it to count. So if the vessel is busted or ruptured inside the body, then it's just bleeding, right? And it's lost. That's still a loss of circulating fluid. And so the body, like, what's going on? And it goes into shock. There's no circulatory control, no circulation at all. That's shock, okay? And so in the peripheral. So it'll start trying to only have circulation inside this part, right? The trunk, the brain, the heart, the lungs. It'll try to keep the circulation going in the midsection or the trunk. The peripherals won't have any. The arms, the legs, they won't have any circulation because the body's trying to live, right? And that can happen from an injury, right? You can get shot and start losing a lot of blood. You go into shock, okay? It's marked. How do I know if the person is going into shock? Well, it could be pallor, which means they look pale, right? Clamminess of the skin, decreased blood pressure, feeble, rapid pulse, and you feel like pulse, and it's just like barely feel it, and it's fast, right? The heart trying to survive, but it ain't working, right? Because you don't have any circulation down here, so you barely feel anything, right? Decreased respirations, they start breathing slower. Restlessness, anxiety, and sometimes they go unconscious, okay? So you have to stop that bleed. If you don't stop the bleed, you're gonna lose your patient, right? That happens, especially in trauma. If you get out of school and go work in trauma, I recommend you go to trauma first, okay? Try to go to a trauma situation first, whether it's in Tennessee or not, so you can put your skills on deck, all right? Make sure you get your skills and you build them real good for about a year or two, and then digress to like regular ICU or floor care or nursing home. Don't get out of school and go straight to a nursing home because they're the first one hiring. Try your best to go somewhere like a high demand either flight team or trauma, okay? Trust me. All right, then phlebitis. Phlebitis, we already know what itis is, inflammation of the veins. Phlebitis will be inflammation of the veins. They can be inflamed, okay? Or a thrombus, which is a stationary clot. Remember you guys, I think Kayla asked me yesterday about the thrombus and the embolus. Well, the thrombus is a stationary clot. It's a blood clot that does not move, okay, in the veins or in the artery or whatever. It's a clot that don't move. That's a thrombus, all right? Then, of course, we have cardiac inflammation diseases, and we already talked about that. Endocarditis, myocarditis, pericarditis, right? Inflamed wherever it is. Endocarditis is inflamed endocardium, right, which is the inner layer of the heart. Pericarditis is when the sac that the heart is in becomes inflamed. Now, the pericarditis can lead to cardiac tamponade, right? And that's when blood gets into that sac, right? So you got the heart in a sac. And if that sac becomes inflamed, then it can start to bleed. If that sac starts to bleed, now you have blood inside the sac and the heart, right? So you got blood in between the heart and the sac, and that's not supposed to be there. That's called cardiac tamponade. And so one way to understand what that is, or remember, I always try to come up with ways to remember. If you think of a tampon, you think of blood, okay? So blood inside the pericardium is cardiac tamponade, all right? So that's, what's cardiac tamponade? The heart is bleeding, okay? The heart sac is bleeding. There's blood in the pericardial sac that starts to cause compression of the heart muscle because the sac don't move. And if blood starts getting into the sac between the heart and the sac, it's going to start pushing on the heart, right? Because the sac not going nowhere. And so, but it's got to go somewhere. The pressure got in the blood has to go somewhere. It's going to start pushing on the heart, and that can cause problems and pain, okay? Couple more. Rheumatic fever is another cardiovascular disease that may cause damaged heart valves or muscles. So it may damage the rheumatic fever. I don't really know what causes it, but we know that it can damage the heart valve itself, either the bicuspid or the tricuspid, right? Or the pulmonic or the aortic valve can be damaged, or even the heart muscle itself can be damaged, and it can cause a decrease in the blood flow, all right? And then angina pectoris. We know angina is pain, and pectoris is chest. So chest pain is angina pectoris. Just a big word for chest pain. Okay, it's pain, and that pain is usually located over the heart area. It can be in your left shoulder or in your jaw. Okay, you can be having a heart attack and feel it in your jaw. Thought it was a toothache, but it was actually heart pain. Okay, angina pectoris. And it's usually due to decreased blood supply or ischemia to the heart by the coronary arteries. So when that coronary artery that we talked about, which is the red one, right? When we have ischemia, we said we have blood flow lost. That blood flow loss will start the pain, right? You're like, what is that? That's because the heart is that muscle is starting to become necrotic, and it's attacking you, right? It might just be a mild, or it might be a massive heart attack. But either way it goes, you can feel it in your arm, radiating down your left arm, your jaw, sometimes in your back, right? Any of that could be a sign of ischemia. So we need to get on in there and find out what's going on, because if there's a blockage, they can either do a stent or a bypass. And that's usually on older folks, but it can happen in the young, especially the diets that we're eating now. And then on the left side, for sure, congestive heart failure. So when you're trying to figure out left and right, just remember this. Congestive heart failure is a left side problem, and cor pulmonale is a right side problem. Cor pulmonale is a right-sided heart failure problem caused by the lungs, and the CHF is congestive heart failure caused by the left side of the heart. And either you had a heart attack and now that left ventricle is not functioning proper. And what did I say? If it's not pumping like it's supposed to, then the blood will start backing up from the left ventricle into the left atria, right? And then if it still keeps backing up, it's going to back up into the pulmonary veins, right? And head back to the lungs. So now the lungs are filling up with fluid and blood, and you can see like a shadow of white on an x-ray, okay? You see the heart, but barely. You can't see the heart borders because it's just fluid all around the heart. That's called congestive heart failure, caused by MI, which is myocardial infarction. You had a heart attack, and now that ventricle does not work proper. It's weak now, right? And if it's weak, it's not pumping like it should. And if it's not pumping like it should, it's going to start backing up, right? And it's going to back up into the left atrium, and then it's going to back up into the pulmonary veins, and then back into the lungs, all right? Because that's the order in which it gets to the heart, okay? So that's why you have to know the blood flow through the heart so you can know what disease is happening where, okay? And then once we know what disease is happening where, we can figure out how do we fix it, all right? All right, so be sure, guys, to look at your notes, look at these videos, and also your book. The reading is imperative, okay? The reading is imperative. Now, I want to show you what I added. I added a video to the module at the bottom, and it is the EKG Made Easy video. Not gonna make you watch it right now. Use the values that we talk about as your normal values or whatever. This is just some nurses that are trying to explain EKGs, what the PR interval is, the QRS complex, little stuff like that, ST segment, right? Just kind of showing you what we're doing, okay? And what EKG is made out of and some of the basics. So watch that video. Should be a good video there. We also have a video here that talks about the, where is it at? Here it is. So that's the EKG Bay video right there. Then I also have this heart chamber and valve video, kind of shows blood going through a heart and the valves and stuff. It's cool. It's not long. I think it's about 3 or 4 minutes. Look at that, and you'll be fine. I will put the assignment in now. I'm going to end the class at this time. Tomorrow is Monday is your lab. Come to lab on time, be here at 8 o'clock. We have a lot to cover. We've covered all of the lecture, but when you come to the lab, we'll be able to understand some of the EKG a little bit better. We can talk about the EKG, show you a couple of different ones, show you the EKG paper itself, and give everybody a little piece of paper so you can kind of make your own EKG and put the stickers on the mannequin, how to run an EKG, blood pressure, each other's blood pressure, each other's pulse. So make sure you are in full dress code. Your fingernails all right. Don't come in, ladies, with overlays and long fingernails. Make sure that your hair is the right way, natural hue, your shoes, your lab coat, stethoscope, and your pulse ox machine. All right, bring everything with you. Also, a good therapist always has a watch. Always have a watch with a second hand on it, or preferably a digital with the little, you go get a little Casio. Don't have to be nothing spectacular. Don't have to be G-Shock and all of that. But when you get there, you will be buying stuff like that. When you make it, you'll have the top of the line stethoscope, top of the line watches, all of that. Once you make it, right? And you might have the bread to do it now, but I'm just telling you, that's how we do it when we graduate. Sometimes we give ourselves a gift. I'm gonna get the top of the line stuff, right? But if you're a good therapist, it don't matter what you're using. If you know what you're doing, you can get the job done. But make sure you have a watch when you come, all right? If you don't have a watch, somebody let you use theirs. If you don't have time to buy you one, no big deal, okay? But be in the habit of being fully dressed out on lab days. We're gonna learn a lot more. Bring your lab book, guys. Don't forget your lab book, but also bring your other books as well, because it might be some more things or more notes to take that may help you with the test on Tuesday, okay? We're going to test on Tuesday and jump right into pulmonary A&P. Now we're going to start talking about all the functions and ins and outs of the lungs, right? It's going to keep rolling, and you're going to have to know information from now to help you with that information. Don't remember this information, take the test, and then forget about it. Keep it so that we can layer it, just like Mr. Johnson, right? These are layers. These pages here are layers, right? I can't know about this if I don't know about this, right? I can't know about this if I don't know about this. I can't memorize this and then go to the next one and know how to work it. I got to know all of these pieces go together. And when you leave here, you will have a better understanding of the lungs, the heart, and how the lungs and the heart work together as the foundation of respiratory therapy. Then you're going to take this foundation and go to 220 and start looking at x-rays, start getting ABGs, disease processes and stuff like that. And then you get to 230, you're going to talk about ventilators, how to work the ventilator, what is it doing to your patient? And you got to know about the volumes. You're going to learn the volumes from me. So when you get to the ventilators in 230, you got to remember the volumes from 210. So you have to do these together. Keep studying back. Go back and look at the other ones. Go back, always, so that you can put the stuff together. So when you finally graduate, you can sit for the board pass the test and you know what you're doing. You are then a respiratory therapist, not a breathing treatment pusher. All right? We are therapists. So give me some time to download this video, put it into the system, and I will be putting the homework in as well. And I'll put the homework in first so you'll see it. All right, homework, it'll say homework quiz or something like that. 10/16/2020, due by midnight tonight. And it's going to be that little quiz that I showed you. Just write the answers down on a piece of paper, take a picture of it, upload it like you've been doing. And I will see you guys tomorrow morning. Have a good day.